it's a job that makes you exercise lots of different parts of your brain. So I'm no longer only researching things and writing stuff, but I'm engineering how I'm going to hang something from the ceiling, and I'm putting a more artistic eye on how I'm going to, symmetrically arrange something on a wall. So a curator is an artist, an engineer, and a historian all in one, and it's a very, very cool career, I think. I'm happy that I discovered it.
Welcome to Well Said, Finger Lakes, the podcast where we speak with businesses, organizations, and interesting people from in and around the Finger Lakes region of New York State. My name is Jeremiah Craig, and we're here at the Live Room in Well Said Media in Ithaca, New York. And our guest today is the curator at Chemung County Historical Society in Elmira, New York. Please welcome Monica Groth. Thank you for joining us today, Monica. How are you doing?
Good, I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
This is going to be great. I'm really interested to hear all about the Historical Society right there in Chemung County because there's a lot going on there and maybe more than a lot of people kind of realize. But first, I was kind of hoping you'd kick us off with what does a Historical Society do and what is it all about?
Absolutely. So the Chemung County Historical Society has been collecting for 100 years now the objects, the stories of the individuals, the people who live in Chemung County, and their effects on their homes, their society, and the greater world at large. The thing that I love about our historical society is it seems like a small local place, and yet you learn how those stories fit into larger stories of national history and global history and beyond. So yeah, it's a fantastic job. I have a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, and it does go nationally and globally because there's things related to Mark Twain, the Civil War, and we'll get into that. I'm really excited to do that. But you also mentioned that you just celebrated the 100th anniversary. Can you explain maybe a little bit about what that 100th anniversary exhibit was like?
We designed a special exhibition for our centennial called It's About Time. And in this exhibit, we give viewers a behind-the-scenes look at what we do as a historical society. We thought this would be far more interesting than giving a rote explanation of what we've been doing for 100 years and what's happened over 100 years. Far more interesting to bring people into our offices and our collections and explain what we do. So in that exhibit, we explain how we accept items into the collection, how we accession things, so we give everything a unique number so we can find it in our database, how we take care of things, we monitor climate, that technology that we use to monitor climate and keep things properly stored has changed over a century. We talk about how we design exhibits. So it was very interesting for me as the curator to make an exhibit about exhibits. In the exhibition, we actually have a time-lapse video that shows me putting stuff up on the wall with one of our volunteers, shows us going behind the scenes into collections and gathering some of the items that we put on display. So I'd invite anyone who's curious about what we do and what happens at a museum to come and check the exhibit out, not only to learn what we do as a historical society, but understand how museums operate in the background.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you're talking about setting up an exhibit about an exhibit. Can you give us a little bit of insight into your job of setting up an exhibit and what that's like and your thought process around that?
Yeah, so planning an exhibit usually starts months before any installation happens. So I work with our educator and our archivist and the staff within the Historical Society to plan what the topic is going to be. We try to make something relevant to people and relevant to what we have in our collection, relevant to the time, and we plan what we're going to write. We edit our panel text, and then I select objects that goes along with that story. In this exhibit, I created a kind of scale model for a floor plan, and I experimented with different floor plans, planned out sort of what technology we were going to use. For this exhibit, we had a couple very exciting objects, not least of which was a 1923 American LaFrance Brockway torpedo fire engine, which we had to drive into the gallery to put on display. So that was something we definitely had to plan for and plan the floor plan around. So yeah, quite a lot goes into actually organizing it, imagining not only what pictures you're going to use, what color scheme you're going to choose, and what story you're going to tell, but also planning for those kind of engineering crises that may arise, planning what sort of materials you're going to need to use, what sort of hardware you're going to need. There's also a stained glass window in this exhibit, which we lit with LED lights from behind so people can view it better. You have a lot to plan for so that everything looks perfect, and people can see the artifacts as you want them to be seen.
What was it like driving a 1920 fire engine into this building? I mean, was there anything extra that you'd have to do, or does somebody just jump in, turn the key, and drive it in?
So our director, Bruce Whitmarsh, did the driving. I got to sit in the front seat with him. I insisted on that and crank the hand crank siren and ring the bell as we went down the street. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. But this specific item had been beautifully restored. It's in great working order, and so we had some friends, look at it and give it a tank of gas, and it ran like a dream.
Wow, I wouldn't have thought. Like, you think that all these old vehicles in the museums, it's got to be pushed in or towed in or something, like with a forklift or something, but you just drove it right in like it was brand new.
And that's the kind of multifaceted approach to this exhibit. Is it was a 100-year-old item, just like we're 100 years old, but it was testament to what taking really good care of artifacts means. What's the result of preserving that history and doing a really good job of taking care of things over time is that people can see them in their full glory and they work just as well as they should.
Yeah,
It's leaking a little bit of oil here or there. But
oh, my car does that too.
Yeah.
It is from 2005, so it happens, right? I mean, if 100 years old versus 15 or something, I think that it's built much better, Do you think about that in the future with how things are made now and what artifacts will be still around 100 years from now? Because it seems like maybe things now aren't built as well as the fire truck from 1920.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we think about. And everything in our collection is going to deteriorate. I mean, we have some hardtack from the Civil War that was, designed to be carried long distances and rough weather, and it's doing pretty well, luckily. But we have some things like that are organic and degradable, and we have to take really good care of to try to preserve them. Nowadays, I guess some things aren't really built as well as they used to, but we still collect those things. We've got plastic toys and a Barbie lunchbox and all manner of current items we're collecting now that will be historically relevant in the future. We did last year a anniversary exhibition of the 50th anniversary of the 1972 flood in Chemung County and throughout the southern tier. And we put out a call for anyone to donate technology for that exhibit to show how much cell phones and radios and computers have changed in just the last 50 years. That certainly impacts how soon we hear about a natural disaster, how we can predict whether or not a natural disaster is coming or if a flood is going to happen. And people brought in radios from 50 years ago, but they also brought in some cell phones from today, and I put those on display in a case. So yeah, we are collecting things now to be historically relevant in the future.
That is really cool. What is that collection process like? Because I'm sure that you kind of have to sift through it and be like, maybe we don't need this,
right,
and maybe this is really interesting. And then where do you also store all of this stuff?
Great question. So our mission and our collections mission is to accept donations and items that are specifically related to Chemung County. We would like to be able to take as much as is offered to us, but we really have to focus on what's made in Elmira, what's directly related to an individual who was born or lived in the area. So that can mean the letters that grandparents wrote to each other during World War II that people find in their attic and they bring in. It should really be specific to our area. When something is accepted, we go through a bit of a legal process for it to change hands, and our collections committee accepts it as a donation. And then we will individually clean, preserve, and number everything that we get. So we'll photograph it, we'll give it a special number, and we'll put it in our database so that we can find it. Our storage areas, we wish we had more of. We're always running out of storage because we have a continually growing collection. And what's on display at any one time is only a very small percentage of what we really have. But in that behind the scenes exhibit I was mentioning, you can actually get a peek into these storage areas. So we have a big collection storage location on site upstairs in the museum, where there are just rows of boxes numbered and labeled. We've got textile storage for beautiful gowns and shoes and football helmets from the 1930s. We've got all sorts of items stored on site, whether in boxes or on garment shelves or padded shelves. And then we've got so many archival items stored in our library. Archival boxes of letters and magazines and published books. Off-site, we do have a facility, a much larger warehouse, where we're able to keep, say, the fire truck, some old gas stoves and horse-drawn vehicles, and a roller coaster car, all those sorts of items that are a bit too large to store at the museum. We store off-site.
Wow, that's awesome, and really interesting to me that you can store so much right there just in the upstairs. But my question to follow that up would be the climate control and maybe pest control, because I could imagine in maybe an older building that could be an issue, especially in upstairs rooms where maybe it gets a little bit hotter during the summer or colder during the wintertime. What's your thought process around protecting those donated items?
Yeah, we always try to keep the temperature and especially the humidity at a nice little golden range so that nothing gets too brittle, but nothing, mold isn't growing, pests aren't infiltrating areas. We also have to take care of light exposure, so we need to make sure that those areas aren't exposed to heavy light and make sure that they do not deteriorate as everything does deteriorate. So we always keep those storage locations at standard temperature and humidity throughout the year. It's getting much more difficult, I think, for museums as climate change becomes a problem. The fluctuations are crazy, and usually I plan to, switch over our heating and cooling systems, only a couple times a year. We didn't have to used to worry about doing it more often, especially with the older systems that we have, because temperatures are fluctuating so much more than they used to, that it's become a burden for museums, I think, to keep up with that.
Interesting. And that's got to hurt also on the budget end of things if you're spending more on heat or cooling.
Absolutely, yeah. The systems, we're in a very historic building, which is awesome. It's wonderful to have a history museum in a historic building. But yeah, there's a lot of money that goes into keeping the building up to date, and we will be doing a lot of fundraising in the future to preserve the building, not only as a historical place, but as a place that we can function as a museum within, because we have to take care of these temperature and humidity considerations, keep everything safe. And that's always a big struggle. But we do our best, and that's definitely an area that we are always putting resources towards in the future.
Yeah, and that's awesome to protect those items. I want to go back to the fact that you just celebrated the 100th anniversary. And just out of my own personal curiosity, what's it like being a part of something that is 100 years old?
It's pretty amazing. Yeah, it's really fun. We dug through the institutional archives when we were researching this exhibit. So we were finding photographs of curators gone by doing what we were doing, looking at photos and putting objects on display. So it was really fun for me to basically select photographs for this exhibit that showed people handling objects that I could then put right in front of that photograph. So looking through people doing the job I'm doing now and learning from them was a lot of fun. It was very interesting. And the way that we do things has changed a lot over time, not only because we're, now able to use digital data loggers instead of old hydrothermographs to chart pressure and temperature and humidity. Not only has the technology changed, but the missions changed a little bit. Who we're able to collect from has changed a little bit. We now have, an internet presence, which is great. That's changed a lot. So it was very fascinating to be part of such an old institution with its own history, even as it's preserving its history.
Yeah, that's such a cool perspective to be able to look at the picture of a curator in the past and also the item and then put it in the exhibit. That's really interesting. How did you get into curation in the first place? That kind of sparks an interest in me with what you said, looking at those pictures and stuff.
Yeah, so my training is mostly in history. I studied history and science in school, and I was definitely on the research end of things. I wrote long essays about various historical topics, but I loved being at history museums. My father is a history professor, and so whenever we went on a family vacation growing up, we would hit a history museum or historical site. And I quickly fell in love with history museums. I worked at a living history museum, and was just a great time. So I studied at Mystic Seaport in Connecticut, the Mystic Seaport Maritime Museum, which is a living history museum. And I did an internship at the National Museum of Bermuda. And I said, I really like this. This is fun. This is a great way to be part of type of institution that I really love. So that's when I started curation here. And it's a really it's a job that makes you exercise lots of different parts of your brain. So I'm no longer only researching things and writing stuff, but I'm engineering how I'm going to hang something from the ceiling, and I'm putting a more artistic eye on how I'm going to, symmetrically arrange something on a wall. So a curator is an artist, an engineer, and a historian all in one, and it's a very, very cool career, I think. I'm happy that I discovered it.
And a storyteller along with all of that stuff, because as you're going through the exhibit, it tells a story through each one of these rooms. And one of the exhibits that might be just one that's there all the time is Mark Twain, because Mark Twain has a huge influence and history in Elmira. Can you tell us a little bit about Mark Twain?
Sure.
Right, because I'm sure that's a huge area of tourism to the museum.
It definitely is. Mark Twain fell in love with and married Olivia Langdon, who is the daughter of some prominent Elmirans. He met Olivia's brother Charles on the Quaker City on a ship en route to the Holy Land. He was writing some travel works, became Innocents Abroad. And he saw this picture of Olivia and fell in love with her and later met her, was welcomed into the Langdon family, and had a really strong connection to the family throughout his life. He would return to Elmira for 20-odd years to stay with Olivia's sister, Susan Crane, on their farm, Corey Farm, which is on the city's East Hill. And many people don't realize that it's actually there in the city of Elmira, overlooking the Chemung River, that he wrote a lot of his best works. Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn, those all came from his time, in this tranquil retreat on Corey Farm. Susan Crane, his sister-in-law, did not like his profuse cigar smoking, which many people, always see Mark Twain with a cigar in his mouth. So she built a study for him away from the main house, supposedly so he could write in privacy, but also so she could escape the cigar smoke. And this beautiful study, which is in the shape of a pilot house, a riverboat pilot house, was where he wrote these works. And that study is actually preserved on Elmira College campus. So if people come to the museum, they can definitely check out other historic sites in Elmira, including the study there on the College Green.
And what are some of the items that you have that belong to Mark Twain in this regular exhibit?
Yeah. It's very fun to be able to handle some of this. When I first got to the museum, those are the first boxes that I opened up. And actually the first case that I made was a quill pen that belonged to Twain. So it was so exciting to think that he wrote with this, right? But a lot of what we have directly relates to the Langdon household. And if you come and visit, you can check out some of those items: crockery dishes, vegetable dishes, teacups, blankets, bonnets, clothing. One of the most beautiful dresses that we have in our collection, which is one of my personal favorite items in the whole collection, is a beautiful purple gown circa 1880 that likely belonged to Olivia Langdon Clemens. And some of the accessories associated with this dress will actually be on display in the exhibit I'm putting together right now, and that's Your Victorian House is Killing You. That's a fun exhibit about all sorts of kind of hidden dangers within a Victorian home, including toxic dyes and purple dyes like those that dye Olivia's dress.
Oh, wow. So you're putting this together now, but it will probably be out, this exhibit, by the time this podcast drops. And how long will that exhibit be running for?
It really depends. Exhibits are typically up for 6 months to a year. It sort of depends on what the curator feels is best to happen next. I won't be staying at the museum for much longer, so my successor will decide how long that exhibit stays up. But I think people will find it very interesting, so I hope it gets a good run.
Yeah, me too. Speaking of exhibits and how long they run for, as a content creator myself, I'm always having trouble coming up with ideas for content and things like that. How do you come up with ideas for exhibits just to keep it fresh and keep people coming through?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are so many exhibits that I thought would work out. And you only have a finite number that you can do a year. But often we try to find, firstly, something that suits our collection. You know, we have items that can tell a story deeply. We have enough items for a specific topic. But also something that's going to interest people, or something that's maybe specifically relevant. Maybe there's a very popular TV show on the Gilded Age, and we're going to do an exhibit focusing on that because that's what people seem to be really interested in. Or maybe it's an important anniversary of a specific time. The big anniversary will be coming up for the Sullivan-Clinton campaign and Newtown Battlefield, which is a historic site nearby. So we will be celebrating and kind of giving a new look at stories that come alongside important anniversaries to remind people of what's happened in the past.
Does it, do you always look for like even number of anniversaries, like the 75th, the 50th, the 100th? Or does sometimes it's like something is happening and this is the, 63rd anniversary of this or something, but it just fits in with what is happening in society, like you said, and it's just a good fit to get people interested in this thing again.
Exactly. What's more important is that it's something that people are thinking about in a new way, or they're thinking about now because the same trend or the same ideas have sort of come back from history into today.
Can you give us an example of maybe how that is with the Victorian House is killing you?
Yeah, sure. As part of this exhibit, we'll mention how things have changed. So, for example, wallpaper was very popular during the Victorian period. Often you would have toxic pigments in the wallpaper, like arsenic. And when people discovered that bacteria and viruses and germs cause disease. They didn't want dirty wallpaper anymore. They wanted beautifully painted white walls, which were easier to clean. And so they used lead paint. And even though lead paint was banned from residential use, it wasn't banned until 1978, I think. So quite a lot of lead paint still exists in homes. And one of the things we're trying to do whenever we talk about a Victorian danger in this exhibit is say, what about today? Luckily, we have more regulation and safer standards so that we don't worry too much about lead paint being used in our homes. But maybe that's something you need to test for, maybe that's something you want to look into, or just learn more about its history in general. So some younger people may feel that that's removed from their lives, but some older people may remember that growing up, or that ban being an important part of their lives. There are many other facets to this exhibit that have made me think about my house and health and how much life has changed. We'll have a section that talks about sanitation, from chamber pots to indoor plumbing and all these sort of not very romantic notions about history, but that had a big impact on our lives and the way that cities are drawn out today. Everything's very relevant. Toxic dyes, which I'll mention in this exhibit, mostly, say, arsenic-based dyes or aniline dyes that make those lovely purple colors. There's still a lot of synthetic dyes in our clothing today that aren't very healthy for us. And people can read a lot about that and learn about that as well to make sure that they're wearing healthy dyes and better clothing. A lot has changed, but a lot still needs to change. So it'll probably be very thought-provoking to people to see that we do live in much healthier homes, but some of the synthetic dyes and cleaning solutions and various chemicals that were just becoming modern at the end of the 19th century, we still have today, even though we've developed ways to make them safer.
Yeah, and it's always interesting to see how far we've come, but also how far we need to go at the same time. And it's these little things like indoor plumbing that we just don't have any second thoughts about nowadays. But like to think about it just being released back in the day, it must have been completely mind-blowing and changed society to an nth degree, like maybe the internet has in our day or something like that.
Yeah, you have to try to think about how shocking some of these things were. Whether that was, never actually seeing a shade of purple outside of nature before, or in these like dusty, dingy cities where you only had very basic natural dyes, and to like see for the first time something so beautiful, it was shocking to you. You felt like man had conquered nature. This was an era in which people had a great reverence for scientific advancement and innovation and invention. So the idea that, synthetic things and man-made things that were being seen for the first time were great successes was really exciting to people, and they wanted to have the newest dye dress and the newest fandangled plumbing system, even if it might explode accidentally, or a gas stove, even if that might explode accidentally, or gas lighting, even if that might accidentally suffocate them at night. Things were dangerous, but it was also very exciting to discover these new inventions.
I've read that purple is the royal color. Yeah. Is this what is behind that? Because it was so unique when it first came out to be worn?
Purple definitely has a royal association, but it's also very difficult to make a natural purple dye. I believe, and this is not exactly my specialty, but a mauve color would come from European snails, and it was very difficult to get this dye out of these murex snails. And even when you did, being able to show that you were wearing this purple showed that you had influence, you were probably quite wealthy, you were maybe royal. So it was a status symbol because it was so rare and difficult to milk the snail for this fantastic color. So not only was it a status symbol, but by the Victorian era, when you could make it synthetically, this aniline dye was more available to the middle classes, the growing middle classes. So you could look as rich as the rich had in the past and be very proud that you were sporting this dye. It became more affordable to the middle class person, which was great for a lot of people who wanted to look their best.
Yeah, I love that innovation, and it's always the style, right? The status symbols that sort of drives it a little bit extra, gives it that extra push.
Sometimes these things are discovered purposefully, and sometimes this innovation is totally accidental. So in the case of Perkins Purple, this beautiful purple dye that we're talking about, William Perkins was like a 19-year-old kid, really young. He was given a chemistry assignment to try to synthesize quinine, the malaria drug, anti-malarial drug. And he was experimenting with coal tar and all these kind of disgusting, sludgy industrial wastes that the Industrial Revolution was generating. And this coal tar, he was mixing with all sorts of different chemicals, trying to make various drugs and medicines, and accidentally discovered that the test tubes were turning this bright purple color, and that he had created this synthetic aniline dye. It's a very complicated chemical synthesis, actually, and a very complicated chemical compound. But he decided he didn't really want to be a scholar anymore and just became a dye manufacturer and became very wealthy.
That's awesome. I love that story. I had no idea that's how the synthetic dye came about first. It's that's great history there. Let's talk about some of the objects that you collect or that are donated. Sometimes it must be difficult to identify them. What is sort of the process, the research process, or the investigative process to discover what these things are?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes whenever you take something into the collection, you want it to have provenance, we say. So have a chain of custody from history to today, so you know what it is and why it's significant. But sometimes you'll be donated something and you don't know what it is. There are things that I found in the collection that have a lot of question marks attached to them. You're not exactly sure where they came from, but sometimes you're not exactly sure where they are or what they are. I came across something a couple of months ago that was just labeled metal fragment. We didn't really know what it was. And so I did as much research as I could on it by looking at other museum collections. Different, sometimes advertisement catalogs can be a very helpful research tool. Advertisements in newspapers, various other research sources. The internet's a great source when you're looking for images of different objects. And I discovered that this was actually a small mechanical pencil from the Victorian era. And it was in beautiful condition and is actually on display in the 100th anniversary exhibit. But we didn't really know until we did some digging as to try to locate similar objects out there in the world, what exactly it was.
Wow, and that's must have been really interesting because I had no idea that mechanical pencils went back that far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, that was the same era we're talking about where new invention was not only rampant and people were inventing a lot of new things, but when the average consumer wanted those things and they wanted to have a mechanical pencil in their breast pocket to show just what a big part of progress they were.
I love that. And you also mentioned, I remember us talking previously that you found some jewelry and maybe hairpins that were made from human hair and other sorts of human pieces. How do you decipher that something is made from human hair rather than, I don't know, something else, like horsehair or something?
Yeah, well, in this specific case, you have some cultural context,
Gotcha.
right? You have some background to it. It was very popular in the 19th century to make jewelry or even kind of floral arrangements and decor out of hair, mostly hair of lost loved ones or departed loved ones. It was a way to remember them. Sometimes women would even collect their own hair to use as structure for different crafts that they were making. But more often than not, it was an art of memory. And if people are interested, we do have a virtual exhibit on our website that talks more about the art of hair and shows some photographs of the examples we have in our collection. There are several pins. As I mentioned, there are a couple beautiful framed sort of wreaths that people can see that are indeed made of human hair, which nowadays we think is a little bit creepy, maybe, but then it was popular, and it was just a way to remember people you lost.
So that's an item, that's an example of something that you can just look at if it's donated and be like, oh, I know this because this is similar to some of these other things that I've seen before.
Yeah, sometimes you're able to have an analog in your collection already. Sometimes another museum might have a similar item in their collection, and curators talk to each other or reach out. In this collection we knew came from a prominent Elmiran family, and we had a little bit background of, what time period they lived in the city, who their descendants were, etc. So you can gain a little bit of knowledge from that too, to determine its provenance and its context. May tell you when it was made and who it belonged to, what it is.
And this is a virtual exhibit you mentioned, and I was curious about the in-person exhibits versus the virtual exhibits. Obviously, the value of a virtual exhibit is that anybody can see it anywhere in the world. But what's been the response of those virtual exhibits? Has it been a popular part of your website?
Yeah, we have several virtual exhibits on the website, and people really enjoy them. But as much as we've been trying to expand our internet presence, and we also write a blog that may link people to some of our virtual exhibits, we're working to get our database, our collection, searchable in future. It'll take us a little bit of time to get that up, but in the future the public will be able to search our collection for images of items that we have. We do want to make things accessible online. We want people to be able to see these really interesting objects we have. But I think, especially during the pandemic, a lot of museums tried to make virtual exhibits available for people who couldn't come in the door. But now that that's eased, we want people to come back into the doors of the museum. The actual exhibits have their own character to them, and there's an experiential dynamic to actually being there in person, seeing these things in person, and having more of an interaction with them that a virtual exhibit doesn't quite give you.
Exactly. Yeah. It's always more engaging to see something in real life. You can kind of change the angle of how you look at it, right? I always get a much more a deeper feeling for what it was like, or I don't know if it's like too out there in left field, but the energy of something, right? You kind of look at it and you say, wow, somebody actually used this.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, and definitely in-person exhibits elicit that in me personally much more than virtual exhibits. But for somebody who's trying to do research, virtual exhibits mean a lot.
Yeah, they're a great resource. And both just feed the imagination. If you want to imagine what it was like to live in the Victorian era, or have experienced the Civil War in Elmira, or have walked past Mark Twain on the street in Elmira, you are able to do that by stepping into some of these photographs, some of these portraits, thinking about what it would be like to hold some of these objects. That's what I love about about a museum space.
Yeah.
And our building, I think I mentioned, is a very historic building. It's kind of composed of multiple parts, but the front of our museum is the oldest commercial building still in the city of Elmira. It's the Chemung Canal Bank, built in 1834 to handle all the capital deriving from the Chemung Canal that had just been built linking the river to Seneca Lake. And it's a beautiful building to be in. You really see the bank vaults along the wall, you see the columns, and you can imagine what it would be like to be in this space in centuries past.
Wow, that's really special. And you're talking about, I want to back up a little bit because you said something about the Civil War in Elmira, and that made me remember maybe the virtual exhibit that you have on the prison camp that was in Elmira with the nickname of Hellmira.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because it seems like it's an important part of the history from around here.
Absolutely. In part because of Elmira's, important location and connection with railroads throughout New York and Pennsylvania, it became an important mustering depot for troops to gather as regiments went off to fight. We had several training camps within the city. And towards the end of the war, we converted one of those training camps into this prisoner of war camp. There was pretty harsh weather. Barracks didn't go up quite in time. There was a lot of suffering at the camp. Very true, and it happened at prisoner of war camps all across the country. Disease was, I think, the biggest killer. Waterborne illnesses. We were talking about hygiene in the past, things like typhoid fever, cholera, tuberculosis that are easily transmitted between people, especially those bacterial diseases you can get from contaminated water that was within the camp at Foster's Pond. Death tolls were pretty high, but what's interesting in our collection is that we have items that prisoners created in their spare time. So I believe it's included in that virtual exhibit, and we do have on display at the museum not only just the sort of average items that you might see in any camp, but there are also some art items that the prisoners carved in their spare time. So jewelry, pipes, various small things made of bone and wood that the inmates worked on while they were there. So it's interesting to see that even in a place of extreme suffering, these interesting art pieces still exist.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
And with it being virtual and also all of the work that you have with the in-person exhibits, I'm sure that a lot of that, with budgets being tight, it takes a lot of planning and a lot of resources to get these things up and running so that they can be enjoyed by the public. What do you think about when it comes to strategic planning for the year from your position?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as a curator, I think about what sort of exhibits we're going to have, how long they're going to run, what sort of funds I will need for each one. I needed to print a big backdrop to go behind the fire truck, for example, and that cost quite a lot of money, so I had to make sure that was within the budget. Need to sort of plan what archival and preservation items we're going to need. We're going to need a lot of acid-free tissue paper, and safe boxes if we're doing a rehousing project, or we need to utilize new areas to store things. We might need some new safe packing material. Maybe we got some new donation and it needs a specific type of storage, so we need to spend some money to make it a proper box, etc. And so I work out what budget we're going to need as the curator, and I bring that to my director, who then sort of plans how that's going to work going forward within the year. And we're pretty small staff, and we all work together to say what exhibits we're going to do fit into the larger plan for that year. whether it's an anniversary and we're going to work some programming into what exhibit is up, or if we're going to, put the word out about certain things. I did an exhibit a while back called Faces of Chemung County, where there were 9 different portraits of very distinct individuals, very different people, surrounded by objects from that time. So knowing when that was going to be up allowed our educator to plan a series of lectures that related to the different individuals in the exhibit. So there is a lot of planning that goes into what the schedule is going to look like, how much various things are going to cost, and then making sure we're communicating with everyone to fit that in to what we do in terms of programming, and what further research should be done on these exhibits when we start putting them together, because we do have to start that quite many months in advance.
Yeah, and that's the strategy in the strategic planning that you just outlined for us, because there's so much that goes into one of these exhibits or events that you put on that maybe people don't realize that is behind the scenes on these things.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, and within this reflective exhibit that we've done on our centennial, we do talk about the programming that we've done in the past. We talk about all the resources that are needed to put an exhibit in place. And I think often people walk into a gallery and they say, oh, this looks really great. This is really cool. But only if you have a curator's eye do I go into museums now. And I was like, I wonder how much this track lighting cost them, or how did they, is there a fishing line there? Like, how did they suspend this artifact? So yeah, there's a lot that goes into erasing that from the viewer so that they can focus just on the objects and just on the history. We don't want people to go in a museum and say, that's crooked, or, oh my gosh, that looks like it's falling off the wall. We don't want people to see the external stuff. The point there's so many questions when you're designing an exhibit, but in many ways you want to take all that effort out of what people see so it looks effortless and they say, fantastic. I'm not even going to think about that side of things at all. I'm just going to focus on the history here. But at the same time, it's a huge part of everything that we do, and people should know about it. For example, we always hide the accession numbers I was talking about. We don't want people to see this object and know that it's been numbered. Right? We want people to just see it as it is and not think about the little, ink that I wrote on some resin in the bottom right-hand corner. For this exhibit, I actually turn those around and let people see those numbers because we teach them what they mean. So it's interesting to give people that new perspective, but usually you want to make things as, you want to remove all the little details that you don't want people to know from sight. And the museum in general is a bit of a paradox, because you want these things to be safe and stored forever. Putting them on display is a dangerous thing to do. You're exposing them to light. Their environment is changing a little bit when you bring them out of storage and put them in a case. But it's worth it because people learn from them. That's the whole point of a museum. You're saving these things to educate. You're not just saving them to store them in a box forever. And that's the mission. Even if there is always a little bit of a paradox there, it's always worth doing.
Yeah, it's the experience of it all that makes it so special. Speaking of that experience, and now that people know what is behind the scenes in setting all of this up, what are some of the ways that people can support the Chemung County Historical Society other than just, attending the exhibits on a regular basis?
Mm-hmm. Well, there are a lot of ways people can get involved. We're always encouraging people to donate funds or items if they live in Chemung County. But they can also become members of the museum, and just paying a membership, an annual membership, doesn't only mean you get to attend the museum and go to the events that we have, but you'll also get a newsletter, you'll get updates as to what we're doing, you'll, have a good link to all those internet resources we were talking about, so you can see our weekly newsletter and you can get on the blog and learn about what we're doing. So you're connected in ways off site as well as on site the museum. And I'd encourage anyone who's interested in visiting to come and visit, but also to look into becoming a member. We publish a journal we've been publishing since 1955, we talk about in this exhibit, and members can read about local history within the journal as well.
Wow. Is it a physical journal? It's just on, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really special. So what are some of the ways that people can learn more about the Chemung County Historical Society online and things like that?
Yeah, I'd highly encourage people to check us out online. You can, just type in Chemung County Historical Society. We'll pop right up. The Chemung Valley History Museum is a museum that the Historical Society operates, so we're really one and the same. You can find our blog online if you're interested in learning more about, say, the Civil War camp I was talking about Mark Twain. There are photographs online, and there's a lot more detail than I was able to give online. I'd highly encourage people to check that out and also come to the exhibit. Elmira has such a fascinating history, and Chemung County at large has such a fascinating history, but I'd like to mention that even if people visit the museum, they can see many other places within the city. The John W. Jones Museum is a great place to visit during the summer. John W. Jones was a conductor on the Underground Railroad that operated in Elmira. The Civil War prison camp has hours during the summer that people can visit. Woodlawn National Cemetery is an amazing place to visit. That's where Mark Twain is buried. That's where John W. Jones is buried, and a lot of other prominent figures. Ernie Davis. Woodlawn National Cemetery is a great place to visit. I mentioned that study downtown on the college campus. During the summer, we frequently have trolley tours that will leave from the museum and will go to various places throughout the city that's operated by the Chamber of Commerce that allow people to see more of the area. So there are plenty of great historical sites. If you come to the Historical Society first and you learn a little bit about what you want to see, go out and see them.
That's awesome. Monica, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. So the upcoming exhibits are the Victorian House is Killing You. Is there anything else upcoming that people should know about?
Yeah, absolutely. So that Centennial exhibit I mentioned will be up until June.
Okay.
And then we always have a Ghost Walk exhibit or a Ghost Walk event in that cemetery, Woodlawn National Cemetery, in October around Halloween. But don't worry if you missed it. In February, on February 3rd, we will be having a Ghosts in the Museum event. So people can come and see some actor portrayals of historical figures within our museum. As I mentioned, it's a really interesting historical space, so they can learn about some historical figures' lives within the museum as they explore the exhibits and see some of our offices and behind-the-scenes areas.
Awesome. I love it. And it sounds like it's all going to be exciting stuff coming up here in 2024. Thank you so much for spending your time with us, and wishing you the best.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.